Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, prices rise and safety nets vanish. We check in with attorney, author, and government expert Chris Hand about impacts of everything from the government shutdown to Florida lawmakers' increasingly heated political debate over property taxes and the future of public education. Later in the program, a city effort celebrates entrepreneurs with disabilities and a look back at the weekend that was for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But first, we are joined, as we are each month, by our political Sherpa, Chris Hand. Chris, good morning.
Good morning, Ann. Great to see you.
Great to see you as well. And there's so much to talk about, but let's start with just something a little bit lighter. Some people pulling up stakes from downtown Jacksonville. This was the last weekend for some time now for the Florida-Georgia game. And the Jacksonville Fair is starting up its last hurrah downtown before it moves to its new location on the city's west side. So some transition in terms of like the festive fall feeling in the city.
And it can definitely be jarring when traditions change, like these two kind of downtown traditions are about to change. As you say, the Greater Jacksonville Fair is now going to move to a new site on the west side, something that they've partnered with the city of Jacksonville, again, to sort of move them out in the direction of where Cecil Airport is. But also the storied Florida Georgia football game, which has been here since 1933, every year except for 1995 and 1996 when they were building the current stadium. It's now going away for 2 years so they can build a new stadium. Next year it'll be played in Atlanta. In 2027 it'll be played in Tampa. But that'll be a real hole in the community for a couple of years that there won't be a Florida Georgia game. The city of Jacksonville is talking about trying to sort of fill that gap with some events like maybe live watching the game at Daly's Place Amphitheater, or maybe having sort of a smaller version of RV City during the weeks that the game's away. But its loss will be felt. I think people will be very happy when it comes back here to be played in the new stadium in 2028.
Yeah, and probably, also some hopes for the continued, rivalry. I mean, it was a pretty good game considering that the Bulldogs were, I think, greatly favored. So
It was, I mean, if this were
you're
the,
a Gator? Or
I mean, yes, I'm a graduate of the University of Florida, and just in full transparency to our listeners, a diehard orange and blue fan. So the result was a little disappointing, but it was a great game. And I think what's great about this rivalry is there's always been good respect between the University of Florida and University of Georgia fan bases. I've been to this game a bunch. I did not happen to go this weekend, but I've been to a ton of Florida Georgia games, and it's always a lot of fun interacting with, meeting with people who might be, fans of your side or fans of the other side. And there's something really special about either being in that stadium or watching it on television, where half the stadium is Bulldog fans, half the stadium is Gator fans, each side cheering very intently for their side and maybe against the other one. But it really is something that in many ways put Jacksonville on the national map. I do not think we would have a National Football League franchise here in town were it not for the storied tradition of Florida, Georgia. It really demonstrated how much this community supports football. It's something that's been an incredible tradition, and again, that has sort of given Jacksonville national recognition. So I think everybody here will miss the game for the next 2 years, but very much looking forward to having it back in 2028, no matter who you root for.
right. Well, I do want to move on to some sort of more serious topics. Today is the 34th day of the government shutdown. Obviously, starting to see some impacts um, in terms of people's awareness of the shutdown, people missing paychecks, but also this weekend a couple of developments that are really making the financial conversation more pointed, and that's sort of the end of SNAP benefits and the start of um, the open enrollment for the Affordable Care Act, and so those premiums are now much more of a conversation. But let's start with SNAP. What do we know? What is the latest?
Well, and Saturday, November 1st was a very impactful day in terms of some of these kind of benefit programs the government provides, starting with SNAP, as you say. SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which some people better know as food stamps. That is the way that many people are able to kind of afford groceries in this country. Just to sort of put this in some perspective, about 1 in 8 Americans receive SNAP benefits of some kind. The average benefit about $187 a month. And to put this in local perspective, 14.4% of Jacksonville citizens. So, of every 100 citizens living in this community, 14 are on some form of SNAP assistance. So, this is something that's hugely impactful. And as you heard probably from that average benefit, $187, knowing particularly what pricing is like at grocery stores these days, that does not go a very long way. And that's the benefit that some people get to try and feed themselves for an entire month. The funding for that ran out on November the 1st. The Trump administration sort of had announced previously that it was not. They have an emergency reserve at the Department of Agriculture to help fund SNAP, about $5.5 billion to help make sure benefits flow in emergency situations. The Trump administration had decided that they did not classify the shutdown as an emergency situation and were not going to release those benefits, those emergency reserves, so benefits could be funded. So they were the subject of a series of lawsuits. There was a coalition of state attorneys general and governors that filed suit in federal court in Massachusetts, kind of a collection of cities and nonprofits, unions, small businesses that filed a suit in federal court in Rhode Island. Over the weekend, both of those courts ruled that the Trump administration had to spend the emergency reserve, that their interpretation of the law that a shutdown did not constitute an emergency was incorrect. The Rhode Island court actually ordered the Trump administration to spend the funds. And so, again, even if that goes forward now, that's going to take some days to occur and there'll be some delay in benefits. But again, one of the ways that people are now going to really feel the impact of the shutdown on the most basic of human needs, food.
And there has been a little bit of inconsistency in terms of, whether those funds were available or not, because they previously were used, those contingency funds, the last time there was a shutdown under this president in 2018 and into 2019. But also the USDA's website had said just 2 weeks ago that their lapse of funding plan would rely on reserves to cover SNAP benefits. And then that was removed from the website. So obviously all of this is driven by, the political nature of the shutdown and kind of who's advantaged and who's disadvantaged. How does the debate over SNAP benefits, even if they're restored quickly and, perhaps at some point this week, how does that affect the overall conversation?
Well, I think, and I'm sure we'll talk in a second more about sort of the Affordable Care Act subsidies as well. But I think how these affect that conversation, Ann, is these are real impacts on everyday people. Food insecurity is not a kind of doesn't affect one party or the other. It affects millions of Americans, regardless of what their particular party affiliation is or what state they live in. The same goes with the cost of health insurance. As it relates to the sort of ACA subsidies that are sort of at the heart of some of this shutdown debate. So as these impacts are happening to real people, I think there's going to be more and more pressure on members of Congress to try and find some sort of accommodation here to end this shutdown and to address some of these key quality of life and frankly, life and death issues, right? You take issues like hunger and food security and issues like health care. It's hard to find two more issues that not only impact people in their everyday lives more substantially, but also are genuinely life and death issues at times. I think as this sort of kind of this disorder in these two programs continues, that's probably going to put more pressure on members of Congress to solve these issues in the shutdown, move forward.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Chris Hand about the latest political headlines. And if you have comments or questions, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. We're at FCC On Air on Instagram, Facebook, or X, as it's called now. Chris, you mentioned the ACA. So that is something where people are starting to realize the increase that they could be facing in their monthly premiums. And that really is the heart of the shutdown debate as well, which is, basically whether or not some of the subsidies that existed that are being removed, which are, the reason that these premiums are going up, whether those will be extended.
Well, I think millions of Americans experience severe sticker shock over the weekend or starting to over the weekend and going forward as they kind of the open enrollment period for people who buy their health insurance through the Affordable Care Act exchanges. That process opened on November 1st. So people are now being able to look up and see what plans are costing. What they're seeing is those plans are costing a lot more than they did just in 2025 for a variety of reasons. One, each year health insurance companies tend to increase the premiums on their plans, just generally speaking. But because the Congress has not yet authorized an extension of expanded Affordable Care Act subsidies that they passed during the pandemic, those are not included in health plans now. So people are going and seeing 200%, 300% increases in their health insurance as a result of that lack of action. And of course, that is why kind of the Democrats and the minority in Congress have thus far not agreed to reopen the government. They want the Republican majority in Congress to pass legislation that extends those enhanced subsidies so that Americans have some of the same price relief on health insurance that they've had, again, since the days of the pandemic. This is something that has bipartisan support in Congress. In fact, again, like we said with SNAP benefits, health insurance costs are not something that easily break down among party lines. A lot of the sort of folks benefiting from the enhanced ACA subsidies live in Republican states, a lot live in Democratic states. So it doesn't sort of fall along partisan lines, but it does have a huge, huge quality of life impact, particularly given other pricing concerns right now. And you had Professor Michael Bender of UNF on the show last week, him talking about that Floridians have identified housing costs and property insurance costs as their two biggest concerns. I have a feeling that if Mike and his team redid that poll, over the next couple of weeks, healthcare costs would skyrocket on that if that was on the list of choices. Because as people go to the exchanges, and again, tens of millions of Americans get their health insurance through the exchanges, and some of these impacts are felt most substantially in Florida. If they went to the exchanges and saw kind of what their premiums are going to be next year because of the normal increases and because some of the subsidies have gone away, I have a feeling that issue would kind of rise to the top of people's concerns.
I mean, we do know that Floridians are particularly vulnerable to these increases, in part because Florida never expanded the eligibility for Medicaid. And so the Affordable Care Act is really the only way for some poor people to get coverage, to get health insurance coverage. And Florida has more um, people on Obamacare, as it's known, than any state. 4.7 million people, and 97% of those people get one of these subsidy discounts. So there's a lot of people that, some may see their rates increase by some margin, and some are seeing it quadruple.
Well, and I think the projection is of those 4.7 million Floridians who are, receive their health insurance through the exchange, a third of them may no longer be able to get health insurance as a result of these price increases. So you're talking about, 1.5 million people plus who will no longer kind of be able to obtain health insurance. That's a huge swing. And some of the studies on this, Ann, have shown that particularly here in Florida, the most affected group tend to be sort of people in their early 60s who earn somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 to $70,000 a year. They are some of the consumers of healthcare who are going to see the biggest impacts in terms of the enhanced subsidies going away. So again, I think as this goes forward and as people sort of get more into the open enrollment process, see what some of these costs are going to be, I think that is likely to put, just as it with the SNAP benefits we talked about, that is likely to put some pressure on members of Congress of both parties to try and figure out these issues, get the government reopened so that people are not experiencing some of those price escalations for their 2026 health insurance.
I mean, so the question, I guess, is who feels the pressure more? Because right now, Democrats are saying we're not going to support reopening the government and ending the shutdown until there's commitment that these premiums and these subsidies will be extended. And Republicans are saying, look, open the government and we'll deal with this. We need to deal with this with a open government and have that dialogue, but we can't do it unless we're able to go back to work. So who wins in this if there is a winner?
Well, I don't know that there is these shutdowns never have a winner. And shutdowns were not the norm in American government for a long time. It's really been in the last 30 years. Interesting story, when the sort of first shutdown of the new era, sort of 1995 to the present, occurred, I was one of the furloughed federal employees. I was working in the U.S. Congress. Employees were, they had not yet passed the congressional appropriations bill, so they sent a bunch of us home for a few days there. So, enormous sympathy for sort of the federal workers who are going through this right now, which include members of the military, air traffic controllers, a variety of federal workers not getting paid, but in some cases, like in the case of air traffic controllers, still having to provide services even though they're not getting paid because they're deemed essential. So, I mean, I think there's no winners in these shutdowns, and at the end of the day, there's a lot of disruption. They've become a more common tool, but at some point, there's usually something that causes the situation to break one way or the other. What somewhat distinguishes this shutdowns from some of the others that I've seen is that there's no conversation going on. Usually, in past shutdowns, there's been talking going back and forth between different sort of leaders in Congress
And
trying
some
to forge some.
urgency.
Exactly, yeah, trying to find some sort of solution. I think one thing that's characterized this shutdown is there doesn't seem to be as much conversation going on. But some of the events we've talked about, I think, are going to force some of those conversations soon. I would not be surprised if the way this shutdown ultimately ends is that they agree on a clean, continuing resolution to reopen the government in exchange for a standalone vote in both the House and the Senate on extending the enhanced ACA subsidies. Some kind of agreement like that probably works in everybody's interest. The Republican majority can then say, "Hey, we got a clean CR. We didn't attach anything to it." But then the Democratic minority in the House and Senate can say, "Well, we got a standalone vote on the ACA," which is, I think, likely to pass in both houses, given that there's a lot of bipartisan support. And I don't think anyone in Congress wants to go back to their districts, and say, "We did not solve this problem. You're going to be paying, sort of super enhanced premiums in 2026." So a compromise like that is probably how a shutdown ends, and that would be comparable to past shutdown solutions.
Why was it that this didn't become an issue or a bigger issue during when the big beautiful bill was passed, which was effectively what is ending these subsidies? These lawmakers that now want to revisit it, Republican or Democrat, but primarily Republican, since that bill passed on the strength of the Republican votes. Why wasn't this something anticipated then or dealt with then instead of at this point now saying, well, we would like to revisit that?
I suspect it was not in the so-called big beautiful bill because there is a cost associated with enhancing, extending these enhanced subsidies. There was a lot of pressure during that period to kind of keep the kind of cost of that bill down, and there was a lot of discussion, as you'll recall at the time, about how much is this going to add to the deficit, and so I think they probably did not include the enhanced subsidies there because they, from a cost control standpoint, to keep the overall fiscal scoring on that bill down. But now, as you say, I think members of Congress are really feeling the pressure. People are seeing those price quotes from their insurers. People are becoming very concerned. So I would not be surprised if sometime in the next week or two there's not a compromise that says we'll give you a clean CR, but in terms of the Republican majority and the Democrats, what you'll get is this standalone vote to enhance the subsidies. I am very confident members of Congress do not want to go back to their districts in the holiday season with this issue unresolved. So the makings of that deal are there, provided they start talking to each other and try to put that together.
There's a couple other factors weighing in. We're talking about the bills that people are facing. But of course, as you say, we are moving into the holiday season. That does sort of change the shape of conversations people have, especially around things like food. Um, but there are elections tomorrow in a few places, including, the New York governor, the New York mayor race. And, air travel is a big thing. In my memory, the availability of air traffic controllers, the backups that occurred sometimes because of a shutdown and the staffing situation, even though they're required to work, that often was like a big impetus for getting the shutdown to end because everybody travels. And as we move into the holiday season, it becomes a much more tangible issue for people.
Well, Anna, we've been tracking this kind of over the last several weeks. The number of air traffic controllers who are calling in, that they're not available to come to work, is escalating, as is typically the case in these shutdowns when they're not getting paid to do these extremely high stress, high impact jobs. There begins to be some attrition and who shows up at work and who doesn't. And the fewer air traffic controllers that are in duty, as people in this area know, we have one of the biggest kind of ATC centers in the country up in Hilliard, in here in Nassau County. So there's direct impacts in this part of the country. But as that happens, there begin to be impacts on delays and flight cancellations and those sorts of things. As you say, the busiest travel day of the year, is about 3 weeks away, right before Thanksgiving. And so, as those kind of impacts, whether it's air travel, whether it's health insurance premiums, whether it's food benefits, as those cascade, there's again, I think, likely to be more and more pressure on members of Congress. I suspect this will be resolved before Thanksgiving because I don't believe, again, in the same way that members of Congress don't want to go back to the holiday, to their districts over the holidays or their states over the holidays and explain, kind of the issues about food and health care. They certainly don't want to go and explain why people's relatives couldn't arrive for Thanksgiving on time because of air traffic delays. So I think there are a confluence of events here that are really sort of merging together that I think are likely to come up with some sort of solution in the near term.
We're talking to attorney and author Chris Hand about the latest political headlines, and you're welcome to join our conversation. You can give us a call on air at 904-549-2937, or you can email firstcoastconnect at wjct.org. We have a couple of emails I want to get to. One is from Ricardo, and it has to do with the politics around this. He says national polls are starting to show a favorable midterm for Democrats, and UNF polls show Floridians are more centrist than recent election results would indicate. Does Chris think state and local Dems have a chance to make progress in 2026? And what would they need to do to take advantage of these polls?
Well, I think it's important to kind of read these polls in context because we do have sort of some fresh polling data. Just yesterday, the Washington Post published the results of its new national poll, which showed President Trump at his least popular rating since the week of the January 6th, episode in Washington, with, much higher disapproval than approval. But that same poll also showed that voters are also deeply skeptical of the Democratic Party. Their numbers, they were sort of barely ahead of kind of Republicans on a few areas, but I think that poll had sort of bad news for both sides. Again, an unpopular president, but also a very unpopular congressional opposition. Democrats obviously have a lot of work to do to improve their standing. And, we talked about, kind of the poll that Michael Bender and his team at UNF did. I think it's important to point out that even with some of those concerns, when Mike and his team surveyed, kind of head-to-head contests in the 2026 gubernatorial election, Republican candidates still had, whether it was Byron Donalds, who's I think, sort of the likely Republican nominee, or they also had First Lady Casey DeSantis in the poll. Each of those two Republican candidates at this point in the game had double-digit leads over potential Democratic candidates. So again, I think there's no question there's a lot of concern about the state of the country. For example, you'll see kind of the right track, wrong track polling they do. Is the country on the right track? About two-thirds right now say no, it's on the wrong track. But it's one thing to have concern about sort of current office holders. It's another thing altogether for voters to buy into replacing them. And whether Democrats can persuade them or not that that's worth doing will be the key to the 2026 elections just over 1 year from now.
And so, in terms of the elections that are occurring tomorrow, we talked about we mentioned the New York mayor race, but there's also gubernatorial races in New Jersey and Virginia. Do you have any sense as to how those will reflect what we might see in the next, the midterms, or just the state of things currently where people's heads at?
These off-year elections are fascinating because people often do sort of look at them as a barometer or a bellwether for what might happen in future years. I think particularly the gubernatorial races that are on the ballot, often provide some data. As you mentioned, people in the state of New Jersey and the state of Virginia are both electing new governors. In the state of Virginia, which is an interesting state because governors there are limited to a single term. So every 4 years, Virginia has a new governor. The likely, according to the polls, the likely winner there is former member of Congress Abigail Spanberger, who is running to succeed Glenn Youngkin, who's the Republican current governor. She's a Democrat. The polls there suggest that she is likely to win that race. A much tighter contest in the state of New Jersey, where the current governor, Steve Murphy, who is a Democrat. There are two candidates. One who's leading in the polls right now is a member of Congress, Mikey Sherrill, from northern New Jersey. She has a slight edge in the polls. Her opponent, Jack Ciattarelli, he nearly won 4 years ago when he ran against Governor Murphy. But now it's a very tight contest in New Jersey. This is one where national trends could certainly have an impact. clearly in Virginia, there's lots of federal workers, many of whom have been laid off, many of whom are furloughed right now as a result of the shutdown. Those trends, I think, are run in favor of Congresswoman Spanberger winning that race. New Jersey is an interesting scenario where, again, that state has become closer over time. President Trump came closer in New Jersey in 2024 than he had in either 2020 or 2016. But a fascinating dynamic, and there's, again, a Democratic governor and some concerns about governance in the state. Typically, those are factors that might work against Mikey Sherrill, who's the Democrat who's running. But a couple interesting things happened. One is President Trump has become unpopular in the state. The election has somewhat become about him, and in fact, during the election, he, sort of very, publicly said that he was going to cancel what's called the Gateway Project, which is a kind of, a new tunnel connecting New York and New Jersey that has been sort of a bipartisan effort for years. He announced that he was going to cancel funding for that project. That was not a welcome development for the Republican nominee for governor in New Jersey, and a very welcome one for Mikey Sherrill, who's the Democrat who's running. But I expect that New Jersey race to be very close. We'll watch that carefully tomorrow night. But again, I think she's slightly favored in the polls, but New Jersey's changed a lot. And, I think if she wins, or if the Republican nominee wins, it'll be a narrow margin either way.
We've got a call from Tom at NAS Jacksonville. Good morning, Tom. Go ahead.
Good morning. I have a question. Seeing how the House of Representatives is not in session, because that would instigate an investigation into Donald Trump's involvement with the Jeffrey Epstein child prostitution investigation, what good is anything the Senate's going to do if it has to be bounced to the House of Representatives for approval as well?
Thanks, Tom.
Well, Tom, you raise a good point. I mean, both houses of Congress would have to pass a solution to the shutdown, but I think typically what happens in these situations is there is a global solution here that involves both houses of Congress. So you're right. The Senate cannot alone resolve this shutdown. It requires both the Senate and the House. Now, if a deal is worked out, I suspect you will see the House come back into session, which will necessarily involve swearing in the new member of Congress from Arizona, and then passing, probably, like I said, maybe a clean CR with some sort of vote on ACA subsidies.
And just to be clear, that new member from Arizona, it's thought would then tip the balance in terms of creating more enough votes to bring the Epstein matter to the floor, and so that's what he's alluding to there.
Exactly right. There's what's called a discharge petition by which members of the House, if you have a majority of House members, they can bypass the normal House rules process and bring legislation directly to the floor. In this case, legislation demanding the release of all the Epstein files. She is thought to be the 218th vote in favor of doing that. So, again, we'll have to see how that plays out. But again, as the caller suggests, in order to resolve this shutdown, it is going to have to involve both houses of Congress.
We've got a call from Mark in St. Augustine. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Seems like about a week ago, I read a poll from the Washington Post that said, of course, the vast majority of Democrats were for the HCA subsidies, but a huge percentage of people who identified themselves as MAGA Republicans was for the ACA subsidies. I think it was over 50%. So do you think that is figuring into Trump's tactics about keeping the government shut down and the Congress away from, his bills?
Well, you raise a very good point that there is broad bipartisan support for extending these enhanced subsidies. In fact, when you do the analysis, even more citizens are affected in so-called red states than so-called blue states in terms of the impact of where this will be felt the most if the enhanced subsidies are not extended before people can sign up for their health insurance plans. So there is broad bipartisan support, which is why I think there is sort of the makings of a deal there to allow a vote on it. Members of Congress most definitely, I think, want to vote to pass these, and not all of them, but I think a majority in both houses across party lines want to vote to extend these enhanced subsidies, give their constituents some price relief at a time where on every possible form of purchasing, people are seeing price increases as the effects of inflation and issues like tariffs continue to linger. I think members of Congress want to move on that because of that broad bipartisan support that you're talking about.
We've got a call from John in St. Augustine. Good morning, John. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I am wondering if You think that citizens don't understand what the filibuster is or know that it exists, and also media persons, because I constantly hear that Republicans have the House, Senate, and executive branch, and then that's all they say about it. And the media who are interviewing these people never check them. And the reason why this has not been voted on, which it would pass, is simply because the Democrats are using the filibuster to prevent the vote happening at all, which is very strange from the party that constantly harps about democracy.
Thanks, John. I mean, in fact, the president has now asked for them to get rid of the filibuster, but to John's point, that is, the tool that Democrats are using to, offset the fact that they don't have any power.
That's correct. And, for those who are not familiar with the filibuster is a tool in the United States Senate that requires sort of an enhanced majority, 60 votes more as opposed to just 51 or, 50 plus the vice president breaking a tie to pass legislation. There are certain times each year that the Senate can pass legislation, particularly on fiscal matters that don't involve the filibuster, but those are rare occurrences. For the most part, you have to go in and get 60 votes. And that was a tool that was put in place for the protection of the minority, and I think to try and achieve consensus on some of these issues. It's been a tool that's been used by both parties over the years during periods when Democrats had control of the Senate. Republicans obviously used the filibuster to try and block legislation that they did not support, and vice versa. When Republicans have controlled the Senate, Democrats have used it to try and block legislation, exactly like during the shutdown. There's been a lot of debate over the years as to whether the filibuster should be changed or not. I think some of the opposition to it has said this is a way to sort of give kind of the minority interest sort of a seat at the table and a voice. But also, I think the other concern raised is we have a bicameral legislature that is not a parliament. In other words, that is not, kind of automatically controlled by one party or the other and can just sort of pass whatever legislation it wants without considering other views. So there's been talk over time about potentially trying to get rid of the filibuster. As you say, President Trump put out a message about that on social media, just in the last few days. But I think that's unlikely to go away, including the current Senate Majority Leader, John Thune of South Dakota, who's been in the Senate now for almost 30 years.
And has seen the other side.
Yes, he has. And he has said publicly that he does not want to get rid of the filibuster because he recognizes that at some point Democrats might retake control of the Senate, and that will be a tool to ensure that Republican voices can be heard. So I think the caller's right. There isn't a lot of focus on that because it can seem like something of an arcane legislative tool, but it has been in place for many years and has generally had support for its continued existence from both parties.
I want to get to, at least briefly, the issue of property taxes in Florida. It's something that you and I are going to be talking about probably every month going forward now until we get into session. But the House has put together a list of 8 possible ways to get rid of, to trim back, to change the way that we tax property, homeowners' property in Florida. And the governor, who has been advocating for eliminating property taxes, has basically criticized this effort as just too much, too many possibilities. He says that it's not a serious effort. If they're actually going to try to put, that many options before the voters, it shows that they're not serious.
And I'm starting to get the idea that the governor and the Speaker of the House don't like each other very much.
You starting to get that
just
feeling?
starting to get that feeling. No, I think we're likely to see some of the repeated dynamics from the 2025 session where, there was a lot of conflict and tension between the governor and especially the Speaker of the House, Governor Ron DeSantis, and Speaker Daniel Perez, over the issue of property taxes. Speaker Perez convened a committee in the House which came out with, 6 different proposals for changing property taxes in the state, some of which would potentially go on the ballot as constitutional amendments. And then the governor has come out and criticized that. I think he used the term, he said it was milquetoast, that it, as you say, it sort of gave the voters too many choices, might be confusing, and in his, description was really an effort to do nothing. The speaker has come back and called that petty and said, anytime the governor wants to offer up his plan, we'll be, happy
Which he
to
has
talk,
not done.
which he hasn't done yet. So this is going to be the dynamic we see for the entire 60-day session, which starts in January. of 2026 because it is an even numbered year. I think you're going to see a lot of kind of back and forth between the governor and the House, probably with the Senate and Senate President Ben Albritton as a bit of a mediator to try and resolve sort of those differences between the two houses. But most certainly going to be the dominant issue as to what, if anything, goes on the 2026 ballot, and a lot of discussion about what would be the impact if there were a change in the way, if voters were to approve the way we administer property taxes in this state.
And just the fact that this is coming up right now, the change in leadership at a couple of universities here locally. Moaz Lamayam going to be leaving UNF. Tim Cost going to be moving to a role of chancellor at JU. The fact that those are happening simultaneously, anything. Well, first of all, just your thoughts about them happening both. It is fairly consequential to have two main leaders like that leave.
Well, it is, especially because both of them have been very, impactful in their roles. I mean, obviously, President Lamb has only been at UNF for a relatively short time, but I think was popular, well regarded on campus. He had come to UNF from the University of South Florida, where he was the dean of the business school there. So when that, was perhaps not surprising that when University of South Florida had an opening, he, took advantage of the opportunity to go back there. University of South Florida recently became one of the AAU schools in Florida, top research university. That's where his roots were. So, but that now does leave a vacuum in the UNF leadership, and they'll have to go through the process to fill that. As with JU, President Cost has said publicly that this was something that he and the board had been talking about
For a couple of years.
for a couple of years to do this. But again, he's been a transformational leader in his now almost 15 years at Jacksonville University. JU has opened a law school in downtown Jacksonville. It's partnered with the Lake Erie College of Medicine to open a medical school. It's got an honors college. I mean, I think by all accounts, he's been a transformational leader, and will now transition to the role of chancellor. The last person who held that role at Jacksonville University was the legendary Fran Kenney.
Sure.
He will be the second chancellor in the university's history. He'll be succeeded by someone else who's very well regarded, Dr. Lisa Sutherland, who's the current interim dean of the Davis College of Business at Jacksonville University, also had been leading the Cost Honors College, which was one of President Cost's initiatives there. So a very clear transition in place. They had obviously been thinking about that, was very methodical and thought out. UNF, a different situation, just a new opportunity came along, I think sort of an unexpected vacancy there that UNF will now have to fill.
And given, sort of the political leanings of a lot of state university and college presidents, it'll be interesting to see who is chosen to replace Lamayam. But we'll have to leave it there. Chris Hand, great talking to you. Thank you for helping us understand all of these issues today. It's always a pleasure.
Good to see you as always, Ann. Thank you.
All right. Up next, a new city program graduates its first class of entrepreneurs with disabilities. Welcome back. A new city effort to empower entrepreneurs with disabilities celebrated its first cohort of graduates as 8 city residents earned an entrepreneurship certificate of completion at a recent ceremony. Here to tell us about it, we're joined by Kara Tucker, the city's chief of disabled services with the city of Jacksonville. Good morning, Kara.
Good morning.
We're also joined by Nick Mendler. He's the president of I Spy Foundation and a program participant. Nick, good morning.
Good morning.
So, who or what was the genesis for this project, Kara?
Sure. So Right before the end of Mayor Curry's term, the Mayor's Disability Council, which is 13 individuals cross disability that advise the mayor, put together a white paper in regards to entrepreneurship for individuals with disabilities. So that came out of our employment subcommittee with the Disability Council. And then once Gregory Grant from the JSUB office came in during the transition with the Deegan administration, we were able to start the program.
And the JSEB is the Jacksonville Small and Emerging Business Program. And so this is something, Nick, that aims to, and as a program participant, you could tell us better, but it basically aims to get people who have some sort of disability, give them opportunities in becoming successful entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it's a great formalized program where you have a lot of different elements of creating a business, whether that be finance or marketing or the different kind of market research. We go through every week something different to really help us and empower us to become great business leaders here in Jacksonville.
And you are a pretty successful business leader yourself. You've created this resource for people who have vision loss or perhaps are blind, called I Spy, which is a website, and it's basically a national resource for people. That comes because you yourself have some vision loss that you've had, I think, since you were a teenager.
Yeah, so my story is I was diagnosed at the age of 16 with a rare retinal disease called retinitis pigmentosa. Essentially, I still have a lot of usable vision. I can still drive and things along those lines. But, for me working, in tech for 20 years, I just kind of saw a need that basically there needs to be one place where everybody can go to find community and find resources to help them along their low vision journey. And that's what ispy.org is.
And Kara, we said you graduated the first cohort in this program. How can people get involved going forward if they want to be a part of another graduating class?
Most definitely. Our plan is to have our next class start in February. So they can go to jacksonville.gov/empowerjax to fill out the application.
And who's eligible?
Anybody that lives in Duval County that has a disability that wants to look into being an entrepreneurship, if they want to do for business or even with the nonprofits, and to learn how to do partnerships with the government through JSEB, or just to be able to know how to start the business.
And what does the city get out of this? I know it's a partnership, you said, between JSEB, FSCJ is also part of it, but like what's the selling point for the city and for the city council?
So I think just anybody that wants to be an entrepreneur, just because you have a disability doesn't mean it can stop you from owning your own business and being able to work. Some individuals want to work for themselves and they can contribute just like everybody else.
And I think, Nick, you said that, people with vision issues are often very underemployed because of the challenges that can be overcome, but sometimes appear to be a big hindrance.
Yeah, it's definitely a large problem within our community. But, I think even, going through this program, I think the most beautiful thing that we have is there's a lot of talent sitting on the sidelines right now. And I think that not just in the blind and low vision community, but in the disability community as a whole. So, programs like this empower us to really create some change and get people out there.
Yeah. And so is there an opportunity for people who might employ people who have disabilities, Kara, that is something that we should let people know about?
I mean, there's always, with October was Disability Employment Awareness Month, so we do trainings. The Disabled Services Division do training for companies in regards to hiring individuals with disabilities and the accommodation process and all of that through the city services. So there is always a way to get involved.
Well, Kara Tucker, Nick Mendler, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Up next, after a field goal victory for the Jags, we get analysis of what the team should take away from the game and what should stay in Vegas.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Highway, hospital, home, work. Where injuries happen can make a difference in the law and the outcome.
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com. The St. Augustine Amphitheater presents New Orleans jazz and hip-hop artists Trombone Shorty, Orleans Avenue, and Juvenile, Sunday, March 1st at the St. Augustine Amphitheater. Tickets and information available at theamp.com. Florida eye specialists and WJCT present Tired of Looking Tired? Eyelid Surgery, Indications, Insurance, and Outcomes with Dr. Irene Lee, an oculoplastic surgeon, at a free lunch and learn on Tuesday, November 4th. Registration at wjct.org/events.
When the sun sets, the music shines. Jacksonville's Jazz Radio on 89.9 HD4. Cool, classic, timeless, perfect for nights on the First Coast.
New peanut allergies are way down in the United States. That's due in part to a remarkable 180 doctors made in 2015, encouraging parents to introduce peanuts to their infants early rather than waiting until they're a year or two old. Such a simple change, but too long in coming. Public health has some lessons to learn here about how to avoid being caught up in emotions and trends that could hurt more than they help. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 here on WJCT News 89.9.
Elections take place in several states on Tuesday. For next year's elections, the Trump administration has begun asking states for private information about their voters. It's also put people in election oversight roles who have a history of making false claims about the 2020 presidential election. What having election deniers in power could mean for the midterms. Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. It was a squeaker, but the Jags managed to cobble together a victory over the Raiders in Las Vegas yesterday. Here to tell us what happened and what the win means is Alessandra Pontbriand, sportscaster for WJXT News for Jags. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. How crazy was that?
It was a nutty game.
But it was fun to watch.
It never got slow, right? It
No.
was always something back and forth happening in there. And okay, first of all, let's just start with the field goals because this was a
Yeah.
game about field goals.
That's the first thing that I have on my list to talk about, actually. Cam Little's NFL record 68-yard field goal to end the first half. How awesome is that? You know, he's had struggles the past few games, and then to come out with all the confidence in the world before halftime to kick that is just remarkable. And he had extra room, too, past the goalpost. So,
We knew he was capable, right?
Oh, yeah, because he had the 70-yard in the preseason, so you knew he could do it. He just had to get back to his roots. And Gary Smith from the Florida Times-Union did a great story leading up to the game about how Cam Little went home, kind of went back to his roots to be able to get out of this, like, slump. And obviously it worked because what an awesome field goal that was. He beat Justin Tucker's previous record of 66 yards, which was set in 2021. And then also, like you mentioned, the field goals, Cam Little kicked the game-tying 48-yard field goal to send the game into overtime. So he had and it wasn't just him on special teams. I mean, Austin Trammell had a huge return in overtime to set up that game-winning touchdown. So, and then the Raiders did really good on special teams as well. So, you know, how awesome is that, though? That was, I mean, I think he's like 21 still. Yeah, I think he's 21 years old. Yeah, he kicked a 68-yard field goal. It is pretty
record
amazing.
setting. And I mean, it was a fun game for Trevor Lawrence too, right?
Yeah, but you have to give it to him. Liam Cohen said that Trevor was throwing up all night and all morning because he was sick.
Really?
Yeah, he was sick. He came out and had that, horrible interception in the end zone. But after that, he played well for someone that was throwing up all night to be able to go out and win the game in overtime.
And run in 2 touchdowns.
Right. And he lunged on top of the pile to score the game-winning touchdown OT. He was 23 of 34 for 220 yards. And like I said, the interception in the end zone in the first quarter. But I mean, to be sick as a dog, literally, and to go out there and still be able to lead your team to victory is pretty remarkable.
He's a trooper.
Absolutely. But we have to talk about running back Travis Etienne.
I wonder if he was too sick to go to the Waffle House afterwards. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't know. I'll ask him that, though.
Okay, sure.
But Travis Etienne also had a really big game, 22 carries for 84 yards. He added a few passing yards as well. So I think he had 115 total yards in the game. And the offense ran through him, and that's what Liam Cohen has said leading up to this game. He said, we gotta get back to running the ball. Like, we've gotten away from that. That's really why they've lost the past 2 games. But the offense ran through Travis Etienne, and obviously they were able to win the game. So huge game for him. But also the depth of this team. I mean, Travis Hunter was placed on IR, by the way. We don't have an update yet on exactly, what he suffered with that non-contact knee injury, but we'll probably get an update this week. Tim Patrick, Eric Murray, they were ruled out. De'Ami Brown, Brian Thomas Jr., Jordan Lewis, all were injured in the game. Hunter Long was injured in the game, so they only had one tight end on the entire roster that could play at one point in the game. And so, the depth of the wide receivers and the defensive backs really, really showed up. I mean, you're talking about Tim Jones came in, had a crucial first down catch at the end of late in the game to set up the game tying field goal. Parker Washington led the team with 8 catches for 90 yards. I mean, they really had to go into, kind of the players that don't get much playing time. The players had to be called up. Austin Trammell was called up to play in the game, and he had, crucial plays to lead to the win. So, yeah, I mean, it's nice to see that you can go deep into your, wide receivers room, your defensive backs room, and you can still pull out a victory.
Talk about the very last play of the game, because it was a great defensive move that really saved the Jaguars when the Raiders were trying for this 2-point conversion to win.
Yeah, so Geno Smith passed to Brock Bowers for the 2-yard touchdown. Brock Bowers is a Georgia Bulldog. He is just really, really good. I believe this is his second year in the league, and he's just one of the best tight ends. And he really had his way with the Jaguars defense. But Devon Hamilton, he swatted the pass away on the 2-point conversion, and that really sealed the game. That ended the game. And Devon Hamilton, he's kind of like a quieter player that not many people talk about, but he's an awesome guy. I've talked to him a few times. I've done interviews with him. He's so nice. And, the players rave about him when they can. They say he's one of the best nose tackles in the league. He's, like I said, more of a quieter player people don't really talk about, but what a way to come up big in that part of the game to end the game and seal it with just swatting away the ball. And so it's awesome for him. I know Josh Hines-Allen said after he didn't see it, but he heard like the thud of the ball like being swatted away. And then he turned around, he saw that the Jaguars won. He was like, thank God I'm exhausted. Because they took it all the way down to the end of the overtime, which is 10 extra minutes after playing 4 quarters.
Sure.
So yeah, how awesome was that win? Now they get to take this momentum into the Houston Texans. Next week, they're at the Texans, who they beat at the end of September here in Jacksonville.
But still a big rivalry.
Oh, absolutely. You got to win this game. This is a big game. It's their only second divisional game of the season. And so they have 4 more coming up late in this season. So they really need to win this one.
Alessandra Pontbriand, love seeing you. Thanks for coming in post-Halloween and doing the recap. All right. That's our program. Thanks for listening. If you have comments or suggestions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast tonight at 8 o'clock, or you can find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform. First Coast Connect is produced by Stacey Bennett. Our associate producer is Isabella Casapow. Our show is directed by Brady Coram, and our theme music is performed by Club de Belugas. Join us tomorrow for our monthly house call with Dr. Joe Servant. We ask them why nearly half of Floridians have sleep issues. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Arbus Magazine's Art and Healing issue is out, featuring the art of music when creativity heals, exploring how art can be the bridge between grief and hope. More information at arbus.com.